So welcome to my Wellness Tips for You Wednesday. You may have caught my live yesterday on Instagram, but then it didn't save to my phone. So I'm actually recording this, so I know I've got it saved. So today we're talking about adrenal fatigue. I did adrenal fatigue and menopause on my Menopause Monday, and I've had such a huge response from you guys who have either suffered adrenal fatigue and you've managed to get through it all right yourselves now, or you feel like you've got some of these symptoms and you're wondering if that actually might be what's the problem with you. Now, the medical establishment doesn't actually recognize adrenal fatigue as an issue, I suppose because there's no drugs or surgery that fix it. That's the way it goes. But there are hundreds of thousands of people out there who are having adrenal fatigue, and it's something that we're seeing more and more often, primarily because we're all living much more stressful lives. We're constantly bombarded with stressors, whether it's environmental stress, whether it's nutritional stress, stress from lack of sleep, stress from hormone imbalances, stress from fear of finances, stress from divorce, stress from grief. There are so many stressors in our lives nowadays, and going back quite a few years, our bodies are designed perfectly. The thing is, we've not evolutionarily, we've not really caught up with what we need to do in order to manage the way our bodies release stress hormones. So, for instance, our stress hormones are secreted in order to help with a stressor. So, one thing, it happens, it's over and done with, and then, we would probably run away from it, or we would fight it if we're trying to survive for our life, and then it'd all be over. The activity would help us to gobble up the stress hormones, and then it would be done. Then we'd probably feel tired, the body would make us rest, and we'd wake up the next day and we'd go about our daily business. But this day and age, we're constantly bombarded with stress. And that is what's causing the adrenal fatigue. It's a build-up. Stress sort of hits like a bucket. We keep filling it up. And even though if you do things to try and manage your stress, which most of us should be doing to try and avoid adrenal fatigue, that it does tend to have a cumulative effect, and it's a bit like the straw that broke the camel's back. And just going away, if you say, well, yeah, but I go on a lovely holiday, I go on a cruise every year, because stress has such a negative impact on so many aspects of our lives. Even though you might be lying in the most beautiful place on the planet, you're relaxing, you're sleeping well, if your gut is out of sync, which it's highly likely to be if you're having constant stress, and I'll explain all this as I go on, the chances are you're still not absorbing nutrients, and your hormones are still not firing off like they actually really need to be firing off for optimal health, for normal health. So I'm going to go through a few of the sort of the common things to look out for with stress and adrenal fatigue, and I'm going to sort of go over the precursor to adrenal fatigue. So what happens when we're in a high stress environment, or we're firing off a lot of stress hormones, and then what happens when our adrenals have just got so tired that we're no longer able to do that. And so the hormones I'm going to be chatting about predominantly are cortisol and adrenaline. They come from the adrenal glands, which is situated just above the kidneys, and those they're such a crucial part of our existence. They, just remember again that our body works perfectly, but how we look after our bodies is not quite in line with how our bodies need us to look after. And so the good news is there's so many things that we can do to change that, and they're simple changes. So don't feel like, oh, it's all doom and gloom, you've got adrenal fatigue, you can't get out of bed, what on earth's going to happen? With a few lifestyle changes, you can make big adaptations, in fact small adaptations, which are going to have a big effect. But often that will start with some really good sleep, but we'll get into that as I go on. So first and foremost, I think it's really important to remember that stress is going to make you hang on to visceral fat. So you might say, yeah, but I'm not fat. You pinch your skin and you don't feel like you've got a lot of fat underneath your skin. However, when we're constantly in a stress situation, our cortisol levels, which is one of our stress hormones, rises, and that spikes our blood sugar levels. So we release more insulin to try and offset that, and we end up storing fat around our middle. And the reason we do that is because all our major organs are situated around our core area. And so, you know, go back a few generations, if we thought we were going to be going into a phase of famine, it makes much more sense to have fat readily available near our organs for energy. So that's why we store visceral fat, and it's a sign of when you're in high stress levels. It's also really important to understand that cholesterol, HDL, our healthy type of cholesterol, that helps to create stress hormones, and it also helps to create sex hormones. Now, you will find that when people have hit adrenal fatigue, their cortisol levels, their HDL levels are crashingly low. And that's because the stress hormones have gobbled up all their cholesterol, or a lot of their cholesterol, and there's very little left for the sex hormones, which is why adrenal fatigue and infertility problems are so tightly linked. So we'll go into that as we go on. So I've made a few notes because I don't want to miss anything. There's quite a few points that I want to raise. So if you see me looking down, it's just I'm catching up with my notes to make sure I don't sort of miss anything. Just because there is so much to say about adrenal fatigue and things that we can do in order to correct it. So I want to make sure I cover all the bases. So the first thing that you might notice is a sense of blacking out. So one of the signs of adrenal fatigue is when you're sat down or you're bending over and then you stand up and all of a sudden it all goes black and fuzzy. You might go a little bit dizzy. And the reason for that is because cortisol, one of our stress hormones, or the adrenal glands, help to constrict our blood vessels. So when we stand up, obviously we need to constrict the blood vessels to push the blood up to our brain. But when we are in adrenal fatigue, we don't have those stress hormones in sufficient quality to actually maintain our blood pressure. So people with adrenal fatigue will also have very low blood pressure. And so the blood vessels are not squeezing enough, which is why you get that blackout, because when we've stood up, the blood drains out of our brain, and it drains out of sort of the occipital lobe area at the back of the head, which is also where our vision center is in the brain, which is why you get that sort of fuzziness and that blackness. Also, you find that people in adrenal fatigue, when they have a shower, it makes them feel absolutely awful. And the reason for that is because obviously when we're in the shower, it's nice and warm. So the blood vessels in our skin start to dilate, because that's the body's natural remedy for, you know, keeping the core at the right temperature. Of course, when our blood vessels dilate, that reduces our blood pressure even further. And so that's why you might just be feeling so chronically yuck after a shower and so tired after a shower, just because the heart is having to beat so much or work so much harder to get the blood up to our brain, rather than, you know, if we're sort of sitting down or lying down, it's a lot easier because it's not got so far to pump and add the warmth, the extra warmth in there, and it just means that our blood vessels are even less constricted to push the blood up to our brain. So that's one of the first signs you're going to get. Another one is bad sleep. So when you've got very, very high cortisol, you'll find that you might not be able to get off to sleep very easily, and then you wake up through the night, and it's just because your adrenal glands are constantly firing, because you think the body's still in fight and flight. Although you might be in bed, you know there's not a tiger coming to chase you and gobble you up. The fact that you're having constant stress, whether that's from like a boss, or you've got like a deadline that you need to meet and you're worried about it, or your finances are not healthy and you're worrying about it, that's still, our body still sees that as stress. Doesn't matter whether it's the tiger, a dodgy person down the dark alley, or your finances, it's still setting off the same set of responses within our body. And so high cortisol is basically going to mean that you're not going to sleep very well at all, and you'll probably wake up during the night and you just have that sort of like hungover feeling the next day, because you just haven't slept very well at all. Now, the opposite to that, when you then hit adrenal fatigue, is you haven't got that cortisol in your body anymore. It's so low that you're going to sleep. You might sleep solidly for sort of 9 hours, 10 hours. You wake up and you still feel chronically tired. And that's because low cortisol is actually bad for us. Cortisol is so important. We hear so much about high blood pressure and high cortisol and how bad it is for us. And that's absolutely true. So is low cortisol. And in the morning, normally our bodies secrete cortisol to make us get up, sort of motivate us to get out of bed. So when you're in adrenal fatigue, you haven't got access to that extra cortisol. The body's doing things that are, more important. So, just trying to keep metabolism working somehow. It's kind of trying to drag you along through the day. And that's why you can wake up having had, a really long period of sleep and still feel absolutely exhausted because you've not got that cortisol firing off inside of you to motivate you to get out of bed. So that's one thing you're going to notice if you're in adrenal fatigue or if you're getting into adrenal fatigue. The best way to remedy that is to allow yourself some time off and sleep, because sleep is when the body heals. We go through 4 cycles when we're asleep, and it's sort of the theta and the delta cycle, which are the deep cycles of sleep. And as we get older, we need less amounts of sleep, but we all have individual needs. And I think also the time of year makes us sleep more or less as well. I think in the wintertime it's easier to sleep for longer because it's darker for longer. But it's really important that we manage to get those sort of deeper levels of sleep. You find that people that have things like nightmares and night terrors, they're often when you're in that high cortisol stage. So pre-adrenal fatigue, because your body's being flooded by adrenaline, it's going to color your dreams. And so often people who have night terrors, it's because their fight and flight response is firing off more than it ideally should do, and they're perhaps not doing exercise and deep breathing and things like that can help to rid the body of excess cortisol before they hit the adrenal fatigue stage. What was else? Sleep is one thing, but then you can get the overriding just sense of fatigue, just like that feeling of complete heaviness. And actually a really noticeable sign of adrenal fatigue is if you feel like you climb the stairs or you walk up an incline and your legs are just killing you. And it's because when our stress hormones aren't working properly, our body needs fuel, it needs motivation, it needs energy from somewhere. We start to burn up or gobble up the muscles, particularly within our quadriceps, which are our thigh muscles. And so that's another reason why, if you might climb the stairs and you just feel like, that is another sign of adrenal fatigue on its way. But also when we are in high levels of cortisol, so before we get to adrenal fatigue, it has a really negative effect with our thyroid gland. And you'll find a lot of people with thyroid issues have got long-term stress issues as well, and they may even have gone into the adrenal fatigue. So we release something called T3 and T4, or like our thyroid hormones. T3 makes us go faster, T4 slows us down. Well, when we've got very high levels of cortisol in our body, it has a negative effect on T3, which is why you then eventually get to that stage where your motivation, your drive, your energy, your enthusiasm just slips off. But the problem is, as our T3 levels fall, it also means that cortisol stays in our body for longer, because T3 helps us get rid of cortisol. So when our T3 levels are low, our cortisol stays in our body for longer, which means our T3 levels are getting even lower, which means cortisol staying in our body for even longer. And it can create this cycle of, well, it almost seems like never ending into doom and gloom. You can correct it again. It's simple lifestyle changes that will override that eventually. But that, that sense of fatigue, that heaviness, that complete lethargy, the apathy for what's happening, that is down often because of the high cortisol levels are affecting your T3 levels within, you know, as part of your thyroid hormone. So that's also something really important to watch out for. Another sign of adrenal fatigue is feeling not just cranky with your low blood sugar levels. So if you've sort of not eaten and you're feeling a little bit headachy and you're feeling a little bit, but you feel like it's almost like you've got an explosion of anger. So you know how, like, if you've got children and your kids are hungry, and I mean they can just literally erupt because they need food, they need energy, their body's gone into low sugar, which causes a huge amount of stress to the body. You know, when your blood sugars drop, it really does set off a very strong stress response within the body. I don't think we give enough kudos or credence really to the importance of maintaining healthy blood levels, particularly when we're under constant stress, or even more importantly, hello Snoopy, when we are getting into adrenal fatigue. So a bit like a sort of 2 or 3 year old, you won't just feel a bit ratty, you can just erupt like that. And people who you might find you're incredibly intolerant, road rage, you know, that sort of thing, that the red mist has descended and it's almost like you lose complete control over your sensations of anger and frustration and irritability. And that is an extreme example of when your blood sugar levels have dropped to such a degree. The other thing to bear in mind, so when you've got cortisol in your bloodstream, the body will release it, the pancreas will release insulin to try and balance the blood sugar levels. But of course, when you're in fight and flight, the body needs the glucose, needs blood sugar levels, because you might need to fight the enemy or you might need to run away. So an insulin is working really hard to sort of take that sugar and put it into your cells. Well, when you're in constant cortisol, high cortisol, so constant state of stress, eventually you can become insulin resistant. And the other thing to bear in mind is when you have got high blood sugar in your blood, the pancreas also releases something called glucagon. And glucagon essentially lowers the amount, it works to lower the amount of blood sugar, the glucose in our blood. But that also then has a negative effect on the digestion. So it means that essentially you're not going to absorb as many nutrients when you do finally eat because of the glucagon in your body. And so you're sort of playing this act of spiking blood sugars, body's gone into stress, and then glucagon is being released into your gut, which then means that even when you do eat, you're not absorbing the nutrients sufficiently, which means that then you are going into more nutritional stress. It's also really important to understand our gut is one of our fastest regenerating organs. And when you spread the gut out, it covers the equivalent of half a tennis court. That just goes to show, I mean, that is one massive, massive organ. And if we're not taking care of it, and if it's not absorbing the nutrients that it needs to absorb, that's why we have so many digestive issues, you know, leaky gut, IBS, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, that sort of thing. And also interesting to know is that the gut is born, lives and dies within a space of 3 days. That's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? But it also goes to show that when you start to look after your gut, it's going to heal incredibly quickly as well. The gut's very dynamic. So, you know, you can go through a level of high stress and you might make a few bad choices as far as your nutrition goes. But then, you know, a few days later, you sleep better, you sort of get back on track, and the gut actually does revive incredibly well. So that's a plus point, I suppose. But it's just important to know that, you know, that glucagon will actually affect how you absorb the nutrients. The other thing I want to say with that is when you are still in a sort of fairly high stress situation, when we release adrenaline, when the adrenal glands release adrenaline, 50% of that does actually go into our gut. And when you blast bacteria in our gut with adrenaline, they grow 10,000 times faster than they would normally do. Which is why then when you're under high stress, you can get chronic candida, chronic, yeast infections. It really can upset the gut. Gut health underlines, I mean, it really is the foundation of so much of our overall health, mental health and physical health. So 90% of our serotonin, our feel-good hormone, gets created in our gut. So if our gut is compromised, so is our feel-good hormone. So is our ability to work efficiently every day, because serotonin also helps to motivate us and drive us to sort of make the most of our daylight hours. Serotonin is also a precursor for melatonin, which helps us sleep better at night. So it's really important to make sure that we look after our gut. Our gut health is absolutely crucial. I'm just trying to think what my next one, I just wanted to make sure I go over. Have I covered everything there? Oh yeah, also just to snack regularly. So ideally you want 3 meals a day and 2 healthy snacks. And healthy snacks can be like nuts, raw nuts, not salted peanuts. So you want almonds, cashews, walnuts, whatever nuts you like. And olives make good snacks. Hard-boiled eggs make really good snacks. Maybe like raw vegetables dipped into some hummus, that makes really good snacks. Dates are fantastic. Yes, they're quite high in sugar because they're a dried fruit, but they're also incredibly high in fiber, and they're full of minerals. Dates are something that I eat pretty much 99% of the time. One of my afternoon snack will be a handful of walnuts, almonds and cashews, and probably 3 or 4 dates, and that keeps me going then through until mealtime. Absolutely love them. It's but you want to make sure that you're eating healthy snacks. Don't go for the muffin. They're full of sugar, they're full of unhealthy fats. Go for something that's got some protein and healthy fats in it. It'll keep you going for long. It's also really beneficial, particularly for your brain health. So I think that's that bit that I wanted to go over. Then your immune system. So when we are in high levels of cortisol or stress, cortisol pretty much seriously dampens the amount of lymphocytes in our body, which are one of our 5 types of white blood cells. Lymphocytes help to kill viruses, they help to kill cancer cells. We've all got cancer cells in our bodies, and it's down to our immune system that recognizes that and gobbles them up. So, when you are in long-term stress, your lymphocytes seriously get nuked. And I remember when my dad had died. He'd had cancer for 10 years, and the latter few months specifically were just awful. And I then went through a divorce, and my relationship was on the rocks during the time my dad was dying, and it was just the stress was just horrendous. And looking back now, I know I was exhibiting signs of adrenal fatigue. Didn't know it in those days. I wish I had. I think the only thing that kept me on the straight and narrow, and it's something I've always said, is that I exercised nearly every day and I ate reasonably cleanly. I always produce my own food. I don't buy packaged food. And I think those 2 things are what saved me, because when I look back in those years, it was just, oh God, it was just awful. And I went through cold after cold after cold after cold, and each one I'd get slightly worse, and it was just like, oh my goodness, what's happening? And then eventually my auntie, she said, have you tried Echinacea? And it was just like, I knew about Echinacea. I'd just been so in my head and trying to deal with other stuff, and I hadn't even thought about it. And if you don't know about Echinacea, it's a herbal remedy, no side effects. It's brilliant to help you just boost your immune system naturally. I started taking Echinacea, and within 3 days, I felt transformed. It just got me out of that ditch, and I just felt amazing. And I was able to start to rebuild and find some, it's a bit like an iceberg or a little island floating in the sea. I managed to find an island that I could hang on to and climb up to and sit and rest and just regather my senses, because I had enough of my immune system to help support me sufficiently. And so Echinacea, I would always advise Echinacea if you struggle with your immune system. It's one of the best things that you can take. And then, oh, of course, also something I also wanted to say is long-term cortisol, high cortisol and bad nutrition creates inflammation in our bodies. So does adrenaline. In fact, adrenaline, it bursts out of us. I think it has a lifespan of about 30 minutes in our body. Cortisol lasts for 9 times. I think cortisol, once it's come out, stays in our system for about 9 hours, full on cortisol, and then it eventually dwindles away. But you think you've got a stress response that is then going to stay with you for 9 hours, and who knows, you're not going to have other stress responses which are going to build on top of that. And when we have so much cortisol in our system, it creates inflammation. And we're seeing increasing rates of things like fibromyalgia. We're seeing more autoimmune diseases. All these things you can relate back to long-term stress and also nutritional deficiencies because of that stress. And you may not realize that you've got nutritional stress. You might not might not think, oh, your gut's in a poor health. You might eat really clean and you still may have some candida in there. So it's just being aware of the possibilities that can be out there, and also how easy it is to change them for positive results. So, but when you do some research, there's an awful lot of evidence now that ties the increasing rates of inflammatory disease and autoimmune disease to chronic stress and also poor gut health. So I've got the little doggy here. Come on then, if you come. Who keeps wanting to come up. Yeah, sure, I know, you're a little nuisance, aren't you? She wants to cuddle. And then on to hormones. So when we are under long-term stress, and our adrenals are constantly pumping out cortisol, that actually lowers the amount of progesterone that we have in our body. So it also gobbles up cholesterol, like I mentioned in the beginning. So cholesterol helps us create stress hormones, but it also helps us create sex hormones. But of course, if you're in fight and flight mode, so technically if you're trying to save yourself, your body thinks it's gone into fight or flight mode, there's no time for nookie. So sex hormones are not going to be important, because if you're running for your life, metaphorically speaking, which is what the body thinks it's going to be doing, you don't need to be procreating, because there's no need. You can get on with that once you've survived the emergency that your body thinks you're in. And so the sex hormones are always going to be put, and as an aside, they're going to be a peripheral, frivolous interest when the body's in fight and flight mode. And so what happens is there's very little cholesterol left in order to help create and support those sex hormones. And then in addition to that, high cortisol reduces progesterone. So like in a woman's cycle, the first half is estrogen dominant and the second half is progesterone dominant. Well, if you've got lower progesterone, that means overall you're going to become more estrogen dominant. And long term, that can lead to things like fibroids, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome. It can also, in the earlier instances, create irregular periods, clotting, serious cramping, and that's because your estrogen and your progesterone are out of balance. The other thing to bear in, and also technically means also you're having non-ovulatory cycles. So you can be building, or you're starting a period, but you're not releasing an egg. The egg's there, but it's not released. So then the next month there's another egg there, and the next month there's another egg there, and the next month there's another egg there, but none of them are being released. So you end up with sort of little batch of half-cooked eggs, which are going to cause a lot of issues for you. The good thing to remember is once your progesterone starts to work properly again, it actually has a really powerful detoxing effect of the excess estrogen. So once you get that level back, your estrogen excesses are going to fall off quite strongly. The other thing to remember is long-term stress makes us obviously release more cortisol, which makes us insulin resistant, as I mentioned earlier. When we become, excuse me, I've got a hair on my lip. When we become insulin resistant, the body produces something called aromatase, which is an enzyme. Now, every single of our estrogen molecules was once upon a time a testosterone molecule, and aromatase converts that testosterone molecule into an estrogen molecule. But when we are insulin resistant, aromatase is shut off, which is why often if you see a lady and she's got facial hair, she might have hair on her chest and her back, she might even have male pattern baldness, she might have acne. Those all are signs of chronic stress and insulin resistance, because that aromatase has been cut off. It means that we're becoming more testosterone dominant because the testosterone is not being converted into estrogen. It's really pretty much every lady who is getting hairy like a man would, it's due to insulin resistance. Again, that's something that can be reversed when you put your adrenals back into proper existence, when you make a few lifestyle changes. But you'll also find that, and the acne, of course, you know, when you were thinking, say at school, most people who have acne tends to be boys get it worse than girls on the whole. And that's because of the elevated amount of testosterone, because obviously boys naturally have more testosterone than girls. But again, it's that when the aromatase is shut off, we're more testosterone dominant, which can lead to that acne. So, and also, you know, once you're, when we're in high levels of cortisol and we're in that stress response, it compromises our immune system as well. So, you know, if your immune system's not going to be so good, our skin is our first line of defense. So microbes are going to get in more easily, which again can lead to infection and can lead to acne too. So there's a bit of a sort of a double onslaught there, but specifically combined with male hair patterns, that's often due to insulin resistance. So there are things that you can do to help improve this. Now, something called chasteberry is very effective. It's all lifestyle things that can help us reverse adrenal fatigue. I think probably the most important one is to define your boundaries and to get really good at saying no. I think particularly, I think it's more of a woman thing than a man thing. I think we find it really hard to say no. I think we feel really guilty when we don't put our children first or our partner first. And, you know, I was chatting to somebody the other day who is interested in our nutrition shakes, our superfood shakes, because they have a lot of adaptogen herbs in them, as well as a lot of other good stuff. But it's the adaptogen herbs in particular that help to support mental health. And she said, oh, maybe she'll get them in the new year, purely because there are other things that, you know, the money needs to go on this month, which is understandable. You know, money isn't finite. But when you're thinking this is going to help support your mental health and your nutritional health, it's just like, this should be the first thing you're investing in. But we're so good at investing in other people, and we put ourselves on the back burner. And, you know, I think that goes back to this, get good at saying no. If it doesn't complement you, and if it's something that you can say no to, say no to it. Just define your boundaries. Once you've got over your adrenal fatigue, it's so much easier then to sort of live life a little bit more frivolously. But while you're either near adrenal fatigue or you're in adrenal fatigue, you've really got to look after yourself, because your immune system's compromised. Your blood sugars are all over the shop. Your hormones are all over the shop. Your mental health will be all over the shop. It's not a good situation to be in. So prioritize sleep. If you need 10 to 13 hours, get 10 to 13 hours. Within a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, you'll be in that situation where you're sleeping enough. And if combine that with healthy eating, lots of vegetables, It's really important to have lots of fresh food and meat. I mean, obviously, if you're vegan and vegetarian, you're not going to eat any meat. But you know, grass-fed meat, pasture-raised meat, pasture-raised eggs from pasture-raised hens. They're all incredibly good for us. They're very high in omega-3 fatty acids. You can get omega-3 fatty acids from plant-based sources. Chia seeds are one of the best sources. However, that's short-chain fatty acids, not long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. And the short-chain fatty acids only, I think it's only about 10% gets converted within the body. So just be aware of that. Omega-3 fatty acids are incredibly important for us. Drink lots of water, cut out sugars, you know, fake sugars, you know, I would go, make sure the carbs that you eat are either legumes, green leafy vegetables. Don't eat white bread, don't eat white pasta, don't eat white rice. If you want rice, just substitute it for something like quinoa or amaranth, buckwheat. You know, just do something that's all black beans. Black beans are lovely. So those are more of a legume, but they're very high in protein, they're very high in fiber. When you're fixing your adrenals, you want to be really careful on the amount of carbs that you're eating. You want lean, healthy fat, lean, healthy protein and healthy fats, and obviously fruit and vegetables. So those, I mean, it's pretty much, if our cavemen ancestors would have eaten it, you're good to go, basically. If it's in a packet, even if it says it's healthy on the label, just don't even bother picking it off the shelf. The only thing I would suggest is probably healthy to eat that's in a packet is rolled oats, like, you know, porridge oats. They're incredibly high in fiber. They're really low in natural sugars. They're really low in everything else, really. I mean, they're just incredibly good for you. And I would say that's probably the only packaged item that I buy. Also, avoid caffeine. If you're in adrenal fatigue, ditch the caffeine just for a short while. Ditch fizzy drinks, and make sure, if you can, get some adaptogen herbs. They are just such powerful things, and the reason they're so powerful is because they help the body adapt to stress. So they all grow above the vegetation line. Now you'll find that because of their ability to adapt to stress, means that when we eat them, it enables our ability to adapt to stress. The ones I use are, I just wanted to sort of list what they do. One of them is ashwagandha. That's one of the best ones. It's known for its hormone balancing properties, helps you regulate cortisol levels as well, which of course in adrenal fatigue is absolutely vital. If your cortisol is too high, it will regulate it down. If it's too low, it'll help to regulate it up. So that's a really, really powerful one. You've got maca. It's known as Peruvian Viagra, but again, that is incredibly good with managing cortisol levels and giving us energy. That's why it's called Peruvian Viagra. They do use it as like a sort of an aphrodisiac over in Peru. What was the other one? Brain fog and concentration. Maca helps to improve an awful lot as well. Reishi, that's anti-tumor, anti-androgenic, so anti-male hormones. Anti-aging, boosts your immune system. And then there's other ones I take. There's what was it? Maytake. I'm never quite sure how they say it. Schisandra, astralagus. Adaptogens are just so powerful. If you've not heard about them before and you're a little bit unsure about, am I telling the whole truth, just go and Google the power of adaptogen herbs. They are just so powerful. If you've got low cortisol, you might have a craving for licorice. I actually have licorice root in my kitchen cabinet. It literally looks like a twig, and sometimes I chew it. And in fact, not long ago, I had a really stressful few days, and I really did struggle. There were a few days where, I felt really just so under pressure. And I ended up going to get one of my licorice roots, and I've not had one of those for ages and ages and ages. I mean, they're dried up roots, so they last forever. And I was chewing away at this, and then when I was preparing for this adrenal fatigue study, I was just like, oh my goodness, I was chewing licorice root. And your body's so clever. You know, I think if you've got serious cravings for something in particular, as long as it's not something like alcohol or licorice all sorts, which I love licorice all sorts, but you know, as long as it's not full of rubbish, go for it, because your body knows exactly what it needs. And mine knew that I needed some licorice to help to support my cortisol levels. It was just like, wow, it was amazing. And then there is something you can do. If you go to your doctor and you say, can you please test my blood for adrenal fatigue, your blood will not show up any adrenal indicator until your adrenals are just about completely wiped out. So just beware of that. You can certainly, they might offer you a saliva test, and you do it every 4 hours, or I think it's 4 times a day actually, to because we should have different amounts of cortisol in our body at different times of the day. In the morning it's higher, in the evening it drops off, because we then need to get ready for bed, and so our cortisol levels naturally should drop off, and our melatonin levels should start to increase. But you can get the saliva test, and that will give you a really good idea of what your cortisol levels are doing. You can send off for them. I know in the UK, you can get them on Amazon actually. They're about 70, 80 pounds a test. So that's one way of doing it. And then just having referred to melatonin, melatonin is a hormone that we secrete ourselves naturally. Serotonin is something that we get from when we're outside in ultraviolet light, or when we eat certain foods that help us to release and create serotonin. Serotonin is the precursor for melatonin. So serotonin makes us feel good. As I mentioned before, if our gut is screwed, we don't create the right amount of serotonin, which then also means that we don't secrete sufficient melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone that helps us go to sleep and to rest deeply. So if your melatonin levels are low, you're going to struggle with your sleep. However, melatonin is one of those supplements that you can take, and it's pretty much impossible to overdose on it. I'm not aware of any negative side effects of taking melatonin. I should think if you took it long term, there are bound to be a few, but they are so insignificant compared to not sleeping sufficiently and deeply enough. It's quality of sleep, not necessarily quantity of sleep. And I mean, that's when we build our bodies. We also lose, if you want to lose weight, we lose most of our weight while we're asleep as well. That's when it all happens. We repair our cells, our bodies renew, and our brain flushes, you know, up and down our spinal column and into our brain. That all flushes with fluid. It's so crucial to get good quality sleep on every level for us, not just when we're relating to, you know, the adrenal glands. On every single level, we need really, really good sleep. So prioritize your sleep. Take time out. Say no to things. Get good at, if you meditate, brilliant. If you can't meditate, learn how to just sit quietly. Maybe close your eyes and just focus on your breath in and breath out for 5 minutes, just to create some downtime. The more you do it, the brain will get used to those little moments. And if you live a really frazzled life, I know what it can be like. You know, I run 2 businesses. Okay, my kids are bigger now, but you know, when they were younger, it was absolutely full on. We all sit on the toilet. Make your toilet trips times to just zone out. So rather than sitting scrolling on your phone, which I think most of us probably do, just put the phone down and sit down, close your eyes, and either focus on your breath in and out, or focus on expansion. I always focus on space. I just have this picture of space in my mind, and it creates such a sense of calm in my body. And I think also the other thing to tell yourself, don't know if you do affirmations or not, this really helps me. I always, when I'm feeling really stressed and pulled at every level, the thing I tell myself is, I've got everything I need within me right now, and this is where I need to be right now. And just saying that to myself just makes me feel so much more relaxed, and that I'm okay, and that today is today and tomorrow is another day. And just to have that hope and that faith that even if I'm going through a few trials at the moment, tomorrow is another day with new opportunities. So I hope that helps. And I really appreciate your time. And if you've watched this already when I did my Instagram live, sorry to repeat most of the same information, but there was such an outpouring of interest about adrenal fatigue. And I'm actually going to dive into each individual item surrounding adrenal fatigue in much more detail. So my upcoming Wellness Tips for You Wednesdays will probably be shorter, but specific about one individual aspect of, you know, like why our bodies crave salt, for instance, when we're adrenally fatigued. So if you've got any comments, any messages you want to send me, please do. If there's anything specific around adrenal fatigue that you'd like me to cover in a future Wellness Tips for You Wednesday, again, send me a message and I'll make sure to add that to my ever-growing list. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope it's been helpful, and yeah, I'll catch you soon.